All right, well, welcome everyone. We're so glad you're here. My name is Kurt Hatch. I'm the Associate Director with the Association of Washington School Principals. And I'm just really happy to be here with some partners, some experts in the field that you'll get to hear from here in a little bit. I just want to thank them in advance for participating. We do have a panel today that's featuring some well-known folks in our education community. We have represented Tana, Senn, Karma, Hugo, and they'll all get to introduce themselves too as they do a presentation. We have Karma here, Nicole Rose, William Jackson out of Seattle, and Kristi Dominguez, who's up in Bellingham, all here because we just have a passion for this work, for not just early learning, but for childcare in general. And we know here at AWSP that the COVID shutdown put some strains on a lot of our systems. And when Governor Inslee made his first proclamation and noted that schools needed to find ways to support childcare, that became quickly one of the more, I think, complicated and nuanced changes in our system amidst many changes in our system. So AWSP, we took this on because we care about school leadership, we care about kids, and one of our strategic plan goals is around equity. So across the state, we've seen how the shutdown has maybe put some daylight on issues of equity, and trying to create an equitable system around childcare with all the details really spoke to us. And so we took this on as something that we think will be helpful for everybody out there. And before we dive in, so that's part of AWSP's why, before we dive in, just want to talk a little bit about Zoom etiquette. I'm guessing a number of you have had plenty of Zoom meetings over the last few weeks, and we hope to make this one worth your while in terms of the content and connections that you'll get to make. And in terms of connections, we want all of you to be able to connect in some way with each other. So in addition to making sure that your name on your screen, so example, my name's Kurt Hatch, you can see it up there. If you just want to double check that your name is the way that you want it to be. If you need to make a change and you're not quite sure how to do that, if you hover your mouse cursor over your picture, your video, you'll see two things pop up in blue. One's a mute button and the other one has 3 dots. If you just click on the square with 3 dots, it'll open up and you'll get to select what's called rename. And from there, it's easy. You can just type in the name. And also, what we'd like for everybody to take a quick minute to do is find the chat box, or down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see it looks like a thought bubble, also with 3 dots in it, just says chat. If you could take a few seconds to click and open the chat, okay, if you can go ahead and do that. And then if you could look down towards the bottom, and you'll see a blue oval, almost looks like a tablet. And that's where you can make sure that this next message that you send out goes out to all panelists and attendees. So if you'll click on that blue tablet looking thing towards the bottom of the chat room and open it up, and you'll see a selection where you can select all panelists and attendees. So if you click on that, and then if you write your name, like I'm doing right now, I'll model this. And I'm gonna take a minute to do it here because I have the acronym of AWSP is quite long. It's Association of Washington School Principals. And so then I'm gonna hit return, and hopefully everybody, all panelists and attendees, just saw my name, Kurt Hatch, Associate. And I didn't even say that right. It's supposed to be Association of Washington School Principals. But if everybody can just do the same thing, try to avoid acronyms just because we might not all be familiar with them, and then we'll see who's in the room. This will also allow us to make some connections with the people that you see in the room. Thank you, Susan, Juanita, thanks, Chad. Oh, we got Boys and Girls Clubs. That's great, near and dear to my heart. I grew up in the Boys and Girls Clubs in King County. Thank you, Cynthia. WA's in the house. Hi, Sean, Jessica. Okay, this is great. Thank you, everybody. If you could keep doing that. And Kathy's here. Hi, Kathy. Just letting you know that our webinar is being recorded. Also, the chat room, all of that, all those details get archived. And that's including if you have like a one-on-one chat or a quote unquote private chat with someone, which you can select someone's name and message them. That does become part of the transcript of this meeting. So I just want to let you know that. And we do have some technical assistance. David Morrill and Xenia Duale are part of our communications team at AWSP. So they're helping behind the scenes right now. They will be monitoring the chat room just in case somebody has some technical difficulties. You can express that in the chat, especially if you want to select David or Xenia or AWSP. Actually, I think you can select AWSP and send a message. They'll help you with technical difficulties. Also, what we'd really appreciate is, we don't want this just to be a sit and get panelist questions. We're gonna have some presentations from each of our panelists, about 3 to 5 minutes each, to give you some background and some things that they're focusing on in their context. I have a couple questions for them, but I'm more interested in your questions that you might have for our panelists. So at any time, starting right now, if you have questions that you would like us to try to address during the course of this webinar, just populate them in the chat room. And there's enough eyes on that chat room that hopefully your question doesn't get overlooked. You can always re-ask it if it goes up high and it's kind of out of sight. And obviously, we are hoping for you to be able to contact any of our panelists at any time after this. So we've included their names and their contact information as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and Representative Senn will get us started on, will be our first presenter. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Tana here. Thanks so much to AWSP for inviting me to participate and talk to you about childcare, talk with you about childcare. As you guys all probably know, I'm the chair of the Human Services and Early Learning Committee. I've also done a lot of work with social emotional learning, and I've got 2 teenagers in high school here in the house doing their first day of online learning. So thanks to everybody who's been helping kids get an education. As Kurt mentioned, and as you all know, if you want to go to the next slide, childcare has really been a huge issue, not just from with COVID, but before that. In fact, this legislative session, that was a major emphasis of mine. And we were really trying to raise the profile of the importance of childcare, make sure people understood the challenges that childcare workers were facing, the high cost of childcare for families, the underfunding from the state, and a lot of the childcare deserts around the state where there was not enough access to childcare, and especially infant care, but also just childcare overall. And I would say that when we talk about childcare in general, I think the legislature and in our regular parlance, most people have been thinking about it as a service for 0 to 5. And once COVID-19 hit and the governor came out with a proclamation, as Kurt mentioned, having school districts provide childcare, I think there was a fair amount of confusion and a mind shift that had to happen about childcare, meaning not just 0 to 5, but also for school-age kids. And so when we talk about essential workers, medical professionals, first responders having access to childcare, really, that wasn't just if you have, before school kids, but even, your 3rd grader can't be home alone either. So the schools really had to step up, and the whole kind of mind shift had to broaden to think about childcare as 0 to probably 12 or 13 or beyond, depending on the needs. So one of the goals really was to make sure that we had done great work here in the state to raise the profile of childcare. We wanted to make sure that on the federal level that was also something included in the stimulus package. So I coordinated a letter with 65 of my colleagues who signed on in a bipartisan colleagues who signed on in about 6 hours, because we really were in a rush to make sure we got a letter out to Congress, and Senator Patty Murray, who was really leading the effort to make sure that we got stimulus money focused on childcare in addition to money for schools directly. So luckily we did that. One of the things that I'm also really focused on is that as we move out of COVID and we're moving back into economic recovery, that childcare is going to remain a huge issue, especially if schools, not saying that I have any information, but especially if schools continue to be delayed or not meeting on a regular basis. Next slide. So when we're talking about, again, childcare, just clearly, I kind of mentioned this, that before we talk about brain development, the benefits of early interventions, kids being ready for kindergarten and having the social emotional learning skills, now we're really talking about it more from the, okay, we need it for essential workers to go to work, businesses and families need it, and fundamental to our economic recovery. Next slide. And so just, you know, one of the main things that I want to leave you with is just that, you know, as you are working, coordinating with childcare where in your area is really critical, so that we can make sure, again, for especially for 0 to 5, we're maximizing resources. Schools have provided childcare, and significantly, obviously, community partners. And then school-aged kids, the schools obviously have those connections, but also our after-school programs like the Boys and Girls Club, like the YMCA. So working in conjunction and trying to make sure that we have as much efficiency and supporting those groups who are also having a hard time making ends meet. Just again, very quickly on the state policy side, I just want to mention that during session, we did raise subsidy rates for childcare providers, started providing professional development supports, and that there's still no health care. So also, as you guys are thinking about the role of schools versus childcare and provision, childcare providers don't have the benefits, the pay, and some of the other things that the school districts have. And so as we move forward with with the hybrid, there's also those issues to think about down the road. And then I think Karma and Nicole will talk about some of the things that we have done to help families since with childcare. And then lastly, I'll just mention, as I said, the stimulus package had money both for childcare and for K-12 schools. And I know that we're still kind of trying to figure out what bucket goes and funds what in terms of that, making sure that while the governor said schools have to provide childcare, we also have childcare that's being provided out in the community, and we all want to make sure our first responders and our medical professionals and everybody else has the childcare they need, and so their kids are somewhere safe and doing well during this time. So I will leave it there, and just wanted to kind of give that overall setting of where we are with childcare.
Well, thank you, Tana. And I also would like to thank AWSP for inviting me to be here today. I'm Karma Hugo, Director of Early Learning at OSPI. Next slide, please. I'm going to share with you some of the general guidance available about childcare during the COVID shutdown. The information I'm sharing is also available on the OSPI website. But first and foremost, who should be served by school-based childcare? Children of healthcare workers, first responders, and other prioritized families from kindergarten to 5th grade, as well as those younger students that districts typically serve. That might include students with disabilities ages 3 to 5. We know many school districts were implementing transitional kindergarten this year, so that would include those students. But essentially, childcare in schools is for those students that the district typically serves and enrolls during this time. School-based childcare may include support for classroom assignments, academic learning, social emotional development, nutrition, and other services. Schools may wish to change who's considered at risk during the COVID-19 crisis, enabling the use of federal entitlements for childcare. Schools may also choose to provide that childcare themselves directly, staffed with district employees, or in collaboration with community-based organizations like YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, ECAP, or Head Start, or also might even be in partnership with a community-based organization providing care off-site of school grounds. Families may need many different kinds of types of care, many different hour arrangements for care, possibly different from what schools are able to offer. So this is one reason we ask schools to please direct families that they are unable to serve to Child Care Aware of Washington, their family center, to their website or their call center. Child Care Aware of Washington is an organization in our state that has a service that links families to available care. This is something that happens all year round, but they are stepping up during the COVID crisis and taking extra steps to connect eligible families to care that is most appropriate to their needs. Could be the time of day, could be other children that they have, to make sure that that care is minimized so families aren't enrolling children in multiple programs, but can get their services and their childcare needs all in one location. Many families will directly call Child Care Aware to find care available. And so OSPI is also requesting that districts please contact Child Care Aware directly to provide information about your child care services, like the location, hours of operation, capacity, vacancies, so that eligible families who contact Child Care Aware can get connected. And this information is also available on our website. The Association of Educational Service Districts is also mapping childcare provisions across the state of Washington. One thing it's helping us see is that some communities may have more than enough care, where other communities don't have enough. So the AESD map is helping track the availability of care, which will continue to be important as we transition back to normal, for us to really be able to monitor what the available childcare services are and really continue to try to match that to the need. Also important is to visit the Department of Children, Youth, and Families website for information and updates that are pertinent to district-based programs, but also if districts have licensed programs or are wanting to partner with a program that is licensed or may need an emergency license. Department of Children, Youth, and Families website has all of the updated available information there. Next slide, please. And here is a little general information and program guidance. So of course, schools must adhere to the guidelines for maintaining health and safety provided by the Washington Department of Health. This guidance includes information about health screening, social distancing, as well as steps to take if someone contracts COVID-19 or has symptoms. Schools will continue to receive funding for students, including basic education, special education, and federal funding. Title and LAP funds may be used for different aspects of childcare provision. Some funds may be used to contract for childcare services directly with community-based programs, or to provide custodial services, food services, or to purchase supplies for childcare programs. As much as possible, students should have opportunities for continuous and enhanced academic and social emotional learning with attention to physical and emotional health. Ideally, there is also support for classroom assignments during childcare, connecting perhaps those teachers of record and the assignments that they're developing for their students to those students who are spending the majority of their day in childcare would be hugely supportive for children and their families who are working during the crisis. It's important to note that the availability of childcare in the community has changed a lot over these last several weeks and will continue to change. We know that some school districts did a preliminary survey of their families and communities to determine whether childcare was needed in their, whether they needed to offer it in their district or not. And soon after that, many more community providers were closing their doors. So that has really changed. So we really encourage districts to continue to keep an eye on the needs in their communities and to realize that they may need to increase or decrease care depending on that need. While we still have the need to provide childcare for prioritized families now, very soon, hopefully, we will begin to transition back to normal. So it's not too early to be thinking about childcare and youth activities during the summer and in the months leading up to summer. and to be thinking about how schools might coordinate with community-based partners who are ready and available to begin thinking about programming that they might be able to support schools in offering. We know that these have been incredibly stressful and trying times, and that childcare isn't something that school districts are prepared to do in this way, but we really appreciate the efforts and everyone stepping up. Know that this has been a very important service for children and families during this time. So all the information that I shared is available on the OSPI website, and you're welcome to contact me with questions too. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karma, and thank you all for having us here today. I'm Nicole Rose, the Director of Eligibility and Provider Support at the Department of Children, Youth, and Family, and I'm leading some of our work related to childcare subsidy, and thinking about what does childcare look like as we move forward. So if you could go to the next slide. Oh, and the next one. There we go. So what I appreciate about today is that we're giving you lots of good information, and we are all on the same page and same message here about the information that we're sharing. So I think the thing to remember as we think about early learning in childcare is that could have been happening in a variety of ways in your school buildings. And we have lots of ways that it happens in community-based settings as well. So we have licensed centers, family homes, and school-age programs. Some of that might be a KinderCare, a Y, Boys and Girls Club, ECAP or Head Start. And just a reminder that ECAP and Head Start may not always be licensed. So when we think about all of the opportunities out there, we want to think about the variety of settings where care and learning could potentially be happening. We also, through our child care subsidy program, have licensed exempt family, friends, and neighbor care. And that occurs either in the family or neighbor's home, depending upon who is providing care. Then you have some of your school-based settings, and some of these may be licensed and some may not be licensed, but we want to think about really where is the best place for the family to go and receive that care. In particular, when you think about the social distancing guidelines and maximum group size of 10 and trying to keep the same groups of children together during each day, if you have a family that maybe is in a licensed child care for their younger child, it might make sense if they can go to that same child care for their school-age child as well. So again, you're really sort of minimizing changing up group size and settings. You can go to the next slide. There are a couple of different ways that payment can happen here. So Karma talked a little bit about some of the K-12 funding. We do have Working Connections Child Care Subsidy, and that's for families under 200% of the federal poverty level, and if they're participating in an approved activity. We have made some changes to reauthorization for families, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We do still have staff who are working at the Child Care Subsidy Contact Center, so they can call in and apply. If they have a provider at that point in time, the family could potentially, if they are eligible, apply and really access care the next day. Then we do have families that do private pay, and some of those providers are still open and providing care as well. And then we have ECAP, which is our Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program, which I realize I should have written out. And we do still have some ECAP sites that are operating. Some are providing in-person classes, but others are doing modified services to really think about how they're getting that comprehensive support to some of our most vulnerable families during this time. If you want to go to the next one. So as we think about childcare, the other thing that I think is really important is that we already have an infrastructure out there to provide childcare for our families. And so we want to think about how we can stabilize that community so that when we come out of the crisis, that we do still have a system of care for folks when they go back to school and when they go back to work. So some of the things that we're trying to do at the department is think about how we can stabilize some of the payments and really make things as easy as possible for providers on the back end if they are licensed and able to accept subsidy. So we have moved to enrollment-based payment through June. And what that really means is if a child cannot attend due to illness or a site has to close down temporarily, we can continue to make that subsidy payment. With school being out for the rest of the year, we really needed to look at how we increase those authorizations for school-age children. And so we automatically went in and did that. So providers did not have to do that, or families did not have to do that. We've eliminated the co-payment for families through June, and the provider will get that payment in the payment they receive from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. We've relaxed approved activities for reauthorization. So if a family comes in and they may have lost their job due to COVID-19 or may be searching for a job right now, trying to look at just those families who are already in the system, how to relax those activities. We are working really closely with Child Care Aware to make sure that we're really directing families to them. They can do a variety of different searches to really best meet that family's need if they have 24-hour care needs or whatever it may be. And so getting as much information into that system as possible is really helpful. And then as soon as we have information that we can put out, we are updating that on our Department of Children, Youth, and Families website, where you'll find all kinds of information for families, early learning providers, and others. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And AWSP, thank you for having me participate in this panel. Thank you for all attendees as well. I do come from a different lens as being an assistant principal and working in a school building. Todd Caffey did push into an area that I did want to focus in on a little bit later. But to kind of frame the context here, my name is William Jackson, and I serve as assistant principal at Nathan L. High School for Seattle Public Schools. When the crisis did hit, the coronavirus crisis, school leaders were really asked to take on about 3 separate phases at 3 separate times. The first phase was just checking in on families, checking in on staff, community members, and just ensuring that the basic physiological needs were met. And ensuring that we had food security, food safety, and emergency funding for any families that might have lost their jobs or anything else. And we were supposed to be right there to support them. This transitioned into the next phase, which was essentially focused on getting our teachers ready for digital learning and distant learning. And so our teacher teams met and aligned curriculum, aligned standards, and made sure that everyone was up to speed. And this is where we also connected with students to ensure that they had opportunities to check in, to have resources for technology. And throughout Seattle Public Schools, and I'm sure other school districts, the goal was to ensure that all students did have technology. And that's where we really focused in on. At our school, and I'm assuming throughout the state, the focus was checking in on seniors if you're in high school and making sure that they were on track to graduate. Those that weren't, did they have any opportunities that they could get resources? Or checking into our students that receive English learning services, our families that are our families and students from students that receive special education services. And this led into our final phase, which was really getting our students technology that needed it and in advancing distant learning efforts. All the while though, while this was happening early on, I was called by our superintendent, Juno, to help manage and coordinate the child care efforts in our district. I had no idea the lift that our district was taking and the lift that everyone speaks of in this panel to advance child care throughout the district and throughout our state. It was very impressive and a lot to really understand at the time. I was shepherded by Dr. Keisha Scarlett, who's our Chief of Equity, Engagement, and Partnerships, and also led by James Bush, who's our Director of Alignment and Engagement. Learning really early on the alignment efforts that the city takes with our district, from the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, the Rotary as examples, connected to our school district nurses operation systems for security. Also, our school district nurses, operations for security, and early learning centers. All of this to ensure that our kids had all of their needs met. And our essential workers from Seattle Public Schools families had childcare available for them. All of this learning really pushed me. And really, I really started to think of these 3 questions that I have up. Number 1, how can school leaders support in lifting childcare in our school communities? Number 2, and this is to Todd's point, where should equity and resources be positioned when leading childcare efforts? And I also left to lean into Juanita as well, Juanita Salinas. She helped push my thinking as well when I was putting this together, because she works directly for childcare efforts. And oftentimes we put together childcare efforts without considering our community resources and considering how they should be centered in the conversation. Lastly, what can we learn as school leaders in this crisis for childcare? Thank you.
Thank you, William. And before I move to Kristi, I just want to, like I said, thank you, William, a lot for bringing the school leaders' perspective. Obviously, that's of critical importance to AWSP and the work that we do for almost 4,000 members, assistant principals, and principals across the state. And sharing that perspective just reminds me of the importance of the points that were brought up by Representative Senn, Nicole Rose, and Karma Hugo, and how you're trying to put some of those things in play in a pretty complicated but hopeful setting. And we're going to finally hear from Kristi Dominguez now, who has been working in early learning and childcare for a number of years, and she'll also have some really helpful tips, pragmatic ways that you can do some of the things that William, school leadership rising star in our profession, was talking about just a minute ago. And also before Kristi begins, I just want to encourage people to do what Todd did. And I had made a mistake early on. I asked folks to put your questions in the chat box. It's a lot better for us to track questions if you actually go down and click on the Q&A box. So thanks to Todd for already doing that. And please take some time to put in your thoughts, your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address those after our last panelist. So now we'll move on to.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you to the panel. I feel very honored to be sitting here today talking to them, as most of them have been people I've been calling during this crisis for advice. So in the normal school year, my job is Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. When the crisis hit, I was actually called by Whatcom County's Unified Command Center and asked to lead childcare for all of Whatcom County. So I'm currently working with 7 school districts, and we put together a structure to collectively face this as a unit and not separate districts. So what I knew early on was I needed a structure of how we were going to respond to this. And so you can see the organizational chart that we work from. I also thought about, if any one of us gets sick, who's going to understand and be able to continue to lead this work? It can't rest on one person alone. So you can see in this, we make sure that everyone in this structure knows who's doing what, who to call, and then we use these specialists to make the coordination links. You can go to the next slide. So when I began this, when I got the call on the 14th to take this over for Whatcom County, I knew we already had experts in the field. We have an entire childcare profession that knows how to do this work well. They understand the licensing needs, they understand the health and safety needs, they already have funding structures in place. The other huge piece for us as a coalition when we join together, we want to attend to this crisis now and ensure that on the other side we have a thriving childcare workforce. This would be a really easy thing to do, and this was my concern when school districts were called to do this work, that if it was not done well, we could easily put providers out of work. And to get back on track was going to be next to impossible. So our coalition has two goals. One, to respond to the current needs that are happening, and two, ensure that our workforce is intact, and not only intact, but thriving on the other side. Currently in Whatcom County, 43% of our centers have had to close, and we don't want another one to have to close. If they're choosing to close for safety or health reasons, we understand that, but we want to have structures in place so that they're able to re-enter the workforce and support our systems. I think what COVID has taught us is that if the child care is not in place, a community cannot move forward. You have to have childcare in order for people to go to work. And this has shined a light on that like no other. And so we have to do this very wisely. So you can see that I'm working with 7 school districts and their leadership teams, including superintendents, the Unified Command Center, which also my section of it also is dealing with housing and food security. Child Care Aware is at the table. We meet 3 times a week or twice a week now. We've cut back 1 meeting a week. Licensing is at every single meeting. The Department of Health, so we know the latest needs that we need to address in our child care centers. Our school nurses are part of this. Child care center providers, both home-based and centers. We have a call center, so we took the administrative assistants from Bellingham Public Schools and created a call center to be able to help Child Care Aware manage the calls. So any family, there's no wrong door. If they call Child Care Aware, they're going to find their needs. If they call a school district, their needs are going to be met. So we want to make sure that anytime the first call the family makes to find child care is the only call they have to make, and that we're going to walk alongside them. Peace Health, which is our main medical provider up in Whatcom County, we have special education representation. So if a family calls and they have a child who has an IEP, we're able to address those needs. I have philanthropy at the table, our Whatcom Early Learning Alliance, the YMCA, and Boys and Girls Club, and the Opportunity Council, who is serving as a fiscal manager. So as funds are donated to us, I have put the funds in one place, so any funds that are not used now during this crisis will be on the other side to help child care centers reopen. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So what does that look like in practice? School districts, even though I've been in early childhood for my entire career, I am not, we are not set up to run childcare. We know how to teach children, but the hours, like for the centers to be open from 7 in the morning till 6 at night, school districts are not prepared to do that. My staff was not prepared to do that, but the YMCA was. So this is an example of one partnership that's currently happening. The YMCA has the license in our elementary schools, so they can offer the staff and they have the license and the expertise, but a school district has a responsibility in this. I provide the nurses, I'm providing the space, it's at no charge to the Y. Custodial services, we go in and we clean everything. If they call us and say we need hand sanitizer, any PPE materials, we provide all of that for them. We also have to keep in mind they do not necessarily have subs. So my staff, my teachers and my paraprofessionals are serving as substitutes. So they're on a call center, so they call in the morning and say, I need extra staff. It's also helped with the adult-child ratios that have increased during the COVID crisis. So we're actually able to run a 1:5 ratio with school-age children. And we send in an additional adult in to do the online learning piece of this. So the families, what we heard loud and clear for them, they're working 14-hour shifts. They do not want to go home and do the online learning at night. So we take care of that for families during the day. We provide all the materials for online learning, including technology. If it's a packet, we provide the packet. Any supplies that the center may need. We do not want this to cost our centers a dime. It should be a gift that they're giving to the community, and in full that we're keeping them afloat. And then we provide breakfast, lunch, and meals. One thing that I did not mention on here, and it's just starting to come up, and I think districts and providers are going to see this more and more. Not only is our community in crisis, we need to remember our children are in crisis. Some of them are not seeing their families as much as normal. They do not understand. I make a call to first responders every week, different families, to find out how their children, just to get a sense, how are children responding. You know, night terrors are starting to creep up in school-age children. Bedwetting has increased, behavior has increased, aggressive behaviors, elopement, things that some children were not exhibiting before. So our counseling staff is now going in and they're providing counseling services on site to the children. We also have behavior specialists who are able to go in and help write accommodations and learning plans, because what we don't want to do is have a child in the face of crisis start to feel like they're being labeled. That is not good for the child. It's not good for anybody. So we want to make sure that we're going in, supporting the child and telling them it's okay. It's okay to feel this way, and helping them through that. And then also being able to give our staff some professional development in how to deal with these situations. Because the YMCA, these are not typical children that they were serving maybe prior to COVID. They don't necessarily have the relationship. So we want to send people in who know these children on a regular basis and are able to make those connections for children. As far as nurses, our nurses train everyone, and they go in and they do daily checks and make sure that all the safety protocols are in place. They answer any questions. They also there to answer questions of families who are concerned and have different needs. And so we're just making sure that it's a one-stop shop for the entire family unit.
Thank you so much, Kristi. I'm gonna turn my screen back, and right now, just again, thank you to our panelists. And fortunately, they're gonna hang tight with us for another 15 minutes so they can answer your questions. And like I said, we do have a question already that was posed. We'd love to get more questions. But if you can see at the bottom of your screen should be the Q&A button down there, or at least the Q button looks like. So that's how you can post a question for us. Also, we've got a couple questions for you in the interim while you're thinking of your questions. You're gonna see a poll come up on your screen. We'd love for you to take just a couple minutes to answer. I believe we have a total of 3 questions. So if you could just pause to do that, that would be great. Okay, we're getting some of those questions populated. Thank you. This is very helpful for us. And as that poll continues to get populated, I'll wait just about 30 more seconds. Okay. So as I mentioned at the onset of this webinar, goal number 1 of our 2 strategic plan goals at AWSP is about equity. And specifically, it's about leading for equitable systems, particularly for those who have been historically marginalized or underserved. And so we at AWSP call out racial disparities, and we work towards reducing and eliminating racism, structural and systemic racism, and to look at equity as a lifelong goal as individuals and as systems. And so I have a couple questions, but I'm going to start with the question that Todd Caffey posed, because it goes to the heart of one of 2 of AWSP's strategic plan goals. And so the question is to our panelists, and feel free to, anybody can take this or multiple people can take this. And maybe what we can do, panelists, is if you would like to answer it, just like physically raise your hand so the other panelists can see, and then you can unmute yourself, and we'll just We'll do that. So the question from Todd is, what is being done to keep issues of racial equity in mind when providing school-based childcare? Thanks, William.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't like being the first one to jump in on racial equity questions, but I appreciate that it was posed, and I brought this question in the center of my presentation as well. I think it's more of a problem of practice, personally, that question should be posed in every area that we're in. If you have a simple answer to that, then you have this whole thing figured out, and we wouldn't need childcare. So I don't know if there's any simple answer to this, but I believe that it's a problem of practice that truly should ring true in every single space that we're in. I know that we've had, and I'm sure of it, that other districts around the state and around the nation are struggling with communication with families and understanding that and this is a conversation that I've had with some of my peers and friends, some of our families that are essential workers, English is their second language. And some of them don't have the communication that we have to access the information to even sign up. So all of this is presented in English. For them to even access these resources might be a challenge. And I think even understanding that could be an inequity is a good way in to start to push for what justice does look like in all areas. That's how I can answer it, by even leading with more questions.
Thanks, William. Kristi?
Yeah, this was something that we were focused on prior to COVID, right? And all this COVID has done is highlight the inequities that are just across our systems, right? Like just the online learning piece has been incredible to shine the line of who we were missing when they were in our schools. It's just advanced it even more. The other part of my life when I'm not doing the childcare is I also have, I oversee all our student services in Bellingham, including access to our McKinney-Vento population, which is increasing as this crisis goes on. So it wasn't new to us. What I did do in this was, because we are focused on the essential workers, instead of the district trying to get a hold of the families, I leaned into the employers. So we worked with every employer to say, who is it that needs childcare that you are serving? And so then each employer did an outreach for us and then reported back. So we wanted to make sure we were getting it. The other thing that we have leaned into is our family engagement team, and currently part of Unified Command. Bellingham Public Schools has a strong family engagement team. Our county schools do not. So now we're looking to say, how do we create a family engagement team structure that stretches across Whatcom County? So food security has been one of the issues that we've been managing. So who and where can we make sure we're meeting with families, and then who's showing up, who has the relationships? And so it's just constantly leaning into the relationships that different people in our community have and making sure they're at the table. I think the worst thing we could do is if we decide we're going to do something and do it to people. And so making sure that everyone who needs to be at the table is at the table. Are we nailing it? No. We were doing a crappy job before COVID, I'm sure, and this has just elevated that even more, but we're aware of it.
Thanks, Kristi. Representative Senn?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to mention two components of that too. One is our childcare providers themselves tend to be a very diverse workforce, and actually, ironically, the diversity we want to see in other fields, and yet we have a diverse workforce who often maybe English is a second language for themselves, or in their families, they're lower income, they might not have access to health insurance, and so we're seeing some of the inequities on them and other essential workers, like our bus drivers or grocery store clerks. So just the racial equity lens on the workforce. But interestingly, also, I think what Kristi was saying about food insecurity and homelessness, and even access to online learning, computers, and internet, is I think is again a silver lining, but to give the opportunity for the broader community to understand and see that those are issues, because either they're now seeing them and they didn't themselves experience it before, but now they're like, oh, wait, I'm not a bad person and yet this is happening to me. And certainly in my responses to constituents who, you know, the Monday after the schools were closed, were like mad that we didn't have distance online learning up yet, giving them the opportunity, using that as an opportunity to educate more people about, we need to make sure kids with special needs are getting services, that people are getting food, that the teachers are okay, their families are okay. So kind of taking that deep breath. And again, I think hopefully this is maybe a little bit of an opportunity to educate and maybe build some empathy with the parents and the community about what are some of the struggles within our school buildings and our families.
Thanks, Representative Senn. Nicole?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, so thank you, Representative Senn, for talking about our very diverse provider base. And I think one of the other things we really just have to think about is in different parts of the state, this is impacting people in different ways because of a variety of different reasons. Some of the things that we're also seeing for our essential workers as we think about this is really some of our income thresholds and what people can and can't access has been a little bit problematic as well. And so child care reimbursement rates, thank you for mentioning that earlier on. There will be some increases, but it's traditionally been a lower paying field. And so how can we think about that as we come out the other side of this?
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for all those thoughts. My 2 cents around the notion of equity, in addition to what has already been shared, is if there are ways to raise the voice of the students that are involved in the program and raise the voice of the families, particularly the families that have been minoritized, I think that would go a long way to helping create some more equitable systems. The next question for, well, we had a question up there. I think it might have gone away. I don't see it now, but it was around, oh, there it is. Thank you. And again, thanks, Todd, for that question. We've got about 5 minutes left, and Tammy Larson sent in a question that I'm actually going to ask an impromptu guest panelist who's with us in addition to our current panelists. David Beard is going to be unmuted here shortly, and he can talk to you about his work that he's doing with Schools Out relative to this question. And then if anybody else has something to add, that would be great. So the question from Tammy is, what are districts planning for day camps / childcare beyond the end of the school year? And maybe this applies to some of the things that's going on right now. So David, thank you for being willing to speak out on this. Take it away.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Great. David Beard from Schools Out Washington, and we're a statewide intermediary that supports expanded learning opportunities, which are after school and summer programs, as well as school-age childcare. So we're a counterpart to childcare where but serving kids, we don't run programs, we support them. We serve kids, programs that serve kids ages 5 to young adulthood. So the summer question is a great one and very timely. In fact, we just met with OSPI, several folks, including Karma, on Friday, to have this very conversation summer. And even on earlier today on a DCY call about childcare specifically, you know, it seems like things during COVID time and the care that's needed right now is sort of where we need it to be, but now we have to look what happens when parents start going back to work. And what we're anticipating is a huge increased need in school-age childcare because we're anticipating many more parents trying to get back in the workforce that maybe weren't before, and school's out. So you may see a need for what we're calling an extended summer. If we're allowed to go back to work in mid-May, that means summer programming goes from 2 months to 3.5 months. And for providers, most of whom are community-based, don't necessarily have the funds and or space to be able to do that. So we're starting the conversations now with both departments sort of at a state level, and how can we provide guidance and best practice and support to school districts to work with their community-based providers. So a couple of options there. You know, one is, of course, schools could provide that themselves, and many districts provide summer school, but that's usually time limited and would require some contract renegotiation, of which there's not necessarily time or money for that. So what we're hoping to do is provide some guidance to districts on how you can work with CBO partners quickly, both in terms of funding, if that's possible, in terms of providing space and looking at buildings and custodial support, in providing meals. Some districts do provide summer meals, but many don't, and we're not sure what community-based providers that normally provide meals can. So we're looking at meals and the role districts can play there over the summer. And then we are actually working to survey providers across elementary, middle, and high school to see who's going to be open this summer, what programming might look like, and what their needs are. So that survey is underway, and we're going to be doing that survey every 2 weeks. So I know we're almost out of time, so that's just a quick, so the short answer is we don't know, and we're now trying to work with OSPI and DCYF to figure out what that can look like and how that happens on the ground. And happy to have any offline conversations with any of you. One other small thing that I'll say is around professional development. We are continuing to provide professional development to the field because for some providers, that's the only way they can stay paid. So we want to keep that so we have a workforce to come back to for summer programming, as well as continuing to provide quick PD on how do you engage virtually, how do you engage mixed age classrooms, those sorts of things. So sorry that was long, but there's a lot of work going on.
Yeah, that was very helpful, David. Thank you for being willing to do that. And we see some resources that got posted in the chat room that tie directly to the conversations that we're having around equity, childcare, extracurricular supports, community supports. And really that's why we all came here together to do this webinar, to bring policymakers, community partners, people that are on the ground working with kids. And so we hope that this was helpful for you. We certainly did enjoy coming together as a team and planning this together. We know there's still a lot of work ahead moving into the summer, and we'll see what happens in the fall. But I think taking a long game approach and really getting some systems in play and tapping into all these community resources and communicating with your legislators so they can do the work that Representative Senn is so passionate about doing. So with that, I'm going to bring us to a close. Again, I'll just say thank you to our panelists so much, and thank you for everybody for tuning in. Stay in touch. This has been recorded so we can get this webinar out to you too, because I'm guessing more and more people will need this information as we proceed into the summer. So thank you again, and good luck to you. Thanks for everything that you're doing for kids. Take care, everybody.